Before you watch this video, please make sure to attempt the practice problems in the link above. In this video, I'm going to go over the answers and talk about how I got to those answers. So in situation 1, you've got a crude odds ratio of 4 and your strata-specific measures are both 4. Given this information, would you have confounding, effect modification, both, or neither one? Well, in this example, situation 1, all of our measures are the same. So we would conclude that we have neither confounding or effect modification. In situation 2, we have a crude odds ratio of 4. Our strata-specific measure for measure 1 is 1, and then 2 is 1.1. Now, when you look at these strata-specific measures, what you see is that they're pretty similar to one another. So therefore, that's kind of one initial flag that I have confounding. So I would need to think about calculating an adjusted measure for these strata-specific measures. So the average between 1.0 and 1.1 is somewhere in between maybe like 1.05. If I were to look at the difference between 1.05 and 4, it's going to be much greater than 10%. So given that my strata-specific measures in situation 2 are about the same, they're very similar to one another, and there's a greater than 10% change between the crude and the adjusted measure that I calculated, I would conclude that in situation 2, I just have confounding present. In situation 3, I've got a crude odds ratio of 4. I have a stratum 1 odds ratio of 2 and a stratum 2 odds ratio of 6. Looking at these stratum-specific measures, I can see that they are definitely different from one another. 2 is obviously different from 6. So that's my first indication that I potentially have effect modification because these are different from one another. The other thing that I notice is that my strata-specific measures, they surround my crude measure of association. So given that these strata-specific measures are very different from one another, 2 and 6, and the fact that that crude falls in between them, I know that I just have effect modification. In situation 4, I have a crude odds ratio of 4, and then I have stratum-specific measures of 2 and 3. Looking at these, I can see that 2 and 3 they're very different from one another. They are not similar. And so I know that that's an indication of effect modification. I also see that my crude odds ratio falls on one side of them. So you can see my strata-specific measures are 2 and 3. The crude falls on the other side of that. So I definitely have effect modification because these strata-specific measures are different, but I also have confounding because that crude odds ratio doesn't fall in between, it falls to one side of those strata-specific measures. Then lastly, I have a crude odds ratio of 4, and I have strata-specific measures that are 2.5 and 2.5. Given that these are very similar, they are actually the same. I would want to investigate further for the evidence of the existence of confounding. I know that I don't have effect modification because they're similar to one another, so it's not effect modification. And if I were to calculate an adjusted measure, that would be an average of 2.5 and 2.5, which would be 2.5. And given the difference between 4 and 2.5, I know that there is definitely more than a 10% change. Therefore, I know that I have confounding present in this last situation. So that's an overview of the answers for those practice problems.